Countless studies show the importance of social connection for our health, our happiness, and our overall sense of well-being. So why is it that we're more disconnected than ever?
In the UK, we're suffering from a loneliness epidemic, with more than 40% of individuals aged 16 to 24 saying that they feel lonely.
On this week's episode, we speak to the brilliant Rebecca Ryder, who created Same Shit, Different Brain during COVID to help us feel more connected in a socially distant world.
Becky tells us all about the importance of social connection and about her revolution to reconnect us all. Becky, thank you so much for joining us, and we're really excited to get into this topic. You are a big believer in social connection, but it feels like increasingly we are living in a disconnected world. But why is it that social connection is actually so important?
Thank you very much for having me, both of you, first of all. And yeah, it's a topic I'm quite passionate about now. When I started moving into events with Same Shit, Different Brain, I had loads of different ideas, and I was like, who do I want to attract to meet in real life and speak to? And it just kind of, this theme of communities just kind of came up, and it kind of linked in with why I started the podcast and helping people feel less alone. Obviously, we were in lockdown when I started the podcast, so that was a natural topic we could all relate to. And again, obviously, over the last few years with the pandemic and everything, we've all really missed that social connection. That's the obvious answer. But I think it's what we're here to do. You know what I mean? We're here to connect with each other. We're social animals. We're not here to be isolated, and we feel that. And it's not just the obvious impact on our mental health. It's physical impact of loneliness as well. There's evidence that it impacts blood pressure, heart problems, stress levels, early mortality rate even. It shows people are less equipped to cope with challenges that come up in their life when they experience loneliness. And so many different aspects of this. Politically, I think we are made to be kind of kept separate and all be at loggerheads, and there's so much heated debate that's always going on. And I think the powers that be really want us to be isolated and separate, because when we come together, amazing things happen. Look at the anti-riot, anti-protest bills that are coming through now. They know that there is power in collective, and it's for our well-being, happiness, physical, mental health. Also, we can just achieve so much more when we come together, I think. And yeah,
it's so interesting because I have read as well a lot of studies and seen programs talking about the fact that people really do live longer when they really exist in community. And it does feel as though there are places in the world that do that. I remember watching a program where they talked about this village in the south of Italy. And there are cultures where it's so much more community focused, but yet for some reason it feels like in the UK we're really bad at it.
Yeah, I think the last year or so, we've all been on a journey, I'm going to use that word, and I've been on a retreat a few times in Wales, and it's just living in a community for a few days. You realise how little of that we have as an adult. It's spending that amount of time with people and how good it actually is.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think life's changed a lot, and I have teenage nieces, and I just think, what is it going to be like for them in 10, 20 years time? And hopefully we will move closer towards social connection with people like you bringing us together. But one thing I was really interested to see was that you've spoken really candidly about your own experience, and even at points being terrified just to be alone with your own thoughts, being too scared to just Google mental health support. And I can absolutely relate, and I'm sure so many of our listeners can. Could you tell us a bit about your story and kind of what led you here?
Yeah, when I reflected back on it, it's probably kind of a classic story of when you're coming towards the end of your 20s and you've been going at 1,000,000 miles an hour and you've been striving towards something. And I think for me, a significant point in time when I can trace it back to is I got made redundant when I was 27 from a fashion job, and it really impacted me because for years I'd been wanting to work in this industry. I thought I loved clothes. I thought it would be glamorous, thought it was so creative. And I'd actually come back from living in Spain because I wanted to move into that industry because I didn't see the opportunity to do that there. So when it kind of crashed around me a bit, it really impacted my self-esteem. And I think I'd been putting too much stock in my career, what I did for a living, and probably like didn't really have any like meaning as well. And I had been in that industry, but then I realised it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. And I was like, I need some kind of other purpose. And I think I'd always had an idea in my head as well of like being really independent, someone who was strong mentally, and that's why I was kind of afraid of like Googling these mental health things in case I related to any of them. But then I realised we're all going to go through this. And it was only when I started working in the mental health industry, like I worked for 2 of the biggest mental health providers in the UK, well, 3 actually, that I realised how common it is that we're going to have these challenges. And I'm so glad that I did, because, you know, it makes you sort of better equipped to be with your own thoughts, like I say, and just love yourself a little bit more, that all important self-love.
I think that's so interesting actually as well there, that you talk about like realising that we all have these experiences, because I think sometimes there's a perception that mental health is something that, you know, you either struggle with or you don't. But do you think it's actually much more of a spectrum than that?
Oh, definitely, yeah, because I think even people who say that they don't have any struggles just maybe might not relate to what they're actually going through.
Totally.
I bet we all know someone.
Yeah.
And
I'm fine.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, I've been like that myself, and
me too.
It's good to sort of engage with the things that are making you happy or unhappy. And yeah, it's definitely a spectrum, because I'm not going to say that I've suffered as much as some other people might with really, you know, specific mental health challenges that need professional treatment all the time, and it's going to go on for the rest of their lives. And I think for me, I found out this year, well, I kind of realised last year I had ADHD, and I got a diagnosis this year. And I always thought I had anxiety. Well, from that point of like late 20s, I thought, oh, that's me, I'm anxious. Actually, a lot of the time, ADHD gets misdiagnosed as anxiety. So I'd actually had CBT for it before. And obviously more and more people are realising that they have.
Yeah, this seems to be a really common theme at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you think, because I mean, I'm really interested in all sorts of mental, like the whole spectrum of mental health, but being someone who has been diagnosed yourself, do you know whether it's, is it something that they think is more genetic, or do you think, because we are seeing so many more diagnoses of ADHD, is it something in the way we are as a society and a culture that's causing people, you know, so many more diagnoses of ADHD?
I think it's a combination. It's something that I've thought about quite a bit, because they definitely do think it's genetic. But also there's, again, a spectrum of how severely you might struggle with it or be able to cope with it according to your environment and the things that you do. And technology is an obvious one. Like, I really tried to, the last couple of years, put my phone in a different room for a lot of the time, because if I start going into like a rabbit hole on my phone, my brain goes even faster than usual, and it just kind of spirals with all the spiraling thoughts, intrusive thoughts and everything. But then I know some other people who relate to having ADHD, but they actually think, because of neuroplasticity, where we can train our brains to sort of do anything really, then they think that they can train it out of their brains.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it really is like a different person, different experience.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. Yeah.
And what was it that made you think about taking Same Shit, Different Brain, from being a podcast and featuring these experiences to bringing it into real life?
Well, it's that social connection that talks about, like, I just missed people, and I started it because I wanted to talk to people in lockdown, the pandemic. I missed people then. So it's like I was doing that over Zoom. And then I wanted to, I think I always had at the back of my mind, I wanted to take it into real world spaces and be able to interact with people and just create a really nice environment in a room, and then get to talk to people who were relating to some of the issues that we were trying to tackle as well. So yeah, it's been really lovely.
One thing I'd love to know is kind of what's it been like, and maybe even right at the beginning, how was it kind of getting engagement? Because I think there is just no shortage of lonely adults who want to be in communities and be amongst, just like-minded people. I would absolutely include myself there, but I think there's a bit of a almost like a shame or an embarrassment in kind of admitting that. And do you know what I mean? And I wonder how it was kind of engaging, because I think I'm somebody that would absolutely love to come to one of your events, but I can imagine feeling a bit like I should have more friends, or I should have more people around me. How have you found that amongst kind of people in your community?
Yeah, I think it's very much stigmatized, isn't it?
Yeah.
As adults, to say we want to make new friends.
To even just to say I'm lonely. And I think as well, in our society today, what's really pervasive is this different kind of loneliness. It's not necessarily that there aren't human bodies around us all the time. It's whether you have deep connections, because you could go into a workplace with loads of people, or a gym, or in places you go every day, and there might be loads of people there. But it's about actually having those connections, isn't it? So I think to say I am lonely feels like a scary thing to do. Do you have to take people over a bit of a hurdle with that?
Yeah, I went between, I didn't go between it because I never considered this, but I knew it was going to have to be a happy medium between like a speed mating event, which is very intimidating for some people, and a panel talk where you just sit and watch people and it's quite passive. I wanted people to be able to interact and perhaps push them out of the comfort zone a little bit, because it's not until you do that you do actually find those deeper connections. And then also not scaring them too much, like a speed mating event. But I think, it's a really good point that you make. It's not about like surrounding yourself with people, because people could be in a room full of people and feel lonely, or people could be in a relationship, feel lonely. It's not about whether you're single or in a relationship, anything like that. It's just about feeling a bit disconnected from the world, and where do you find that meaningful connection?
Yeah. And have you found that bringing people together in person, is there anything in particular, any kind of type of event that you've found is just really been amazing for creating those connections?
The last one I did, it was so lovely, because I kind of thought, okay, I've done one now, we'll push them a little bit more, and we'll mark out a specific amount of the time at the end to network. And we had a woman called Sarah who does laughter coaching, like wellbeing laughter yoga.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, and it was so good for getting people out of the comfort zone. And the event before that, we did it through breath work. So I wanted it to be an activity that would connect everyone in the room. It was a woman called Bryony in the first one. And it really worked. And at the end of this event, I just looked around and I saw people, like, even my dad, who was really nervous for doing the event, and he was like, I don't know if I can do that laughter yoga. He was looking into the eyes of a stranger, and like they were laughing their heads off, doing these mad like high fives. And then loads of people making new friends with each other, exchanging numbers. And I was like, oh, that's all I wanted. And so many people messaged me saying, when you're doing it again, I want to come, like even people that couldn't make it. So there's a lot of demand for it, I think.
That's amazing. And I think, what's so interesting is, like, we talked there a bit about that shame that sometimes comes with feeling lonely or admitting that you're lonely. And I think as well, shame is something that comes up a lot with money as well as a topic. People are very much ashamed to admit that they're struggling or they're stressed, or it's just one of those topics that I guess is a taboo in the same way as maybe loneliness is. Do you have any, I guess, tips, ways that you would encourage people to tackle that shame head on?
Yeah, I think like more open conversations like you're doing is so important, and hearing other people talk about it. And yeah, when I was younger, God, I realise now this might be tied to the ADHD, like excessive spending, losing control of spending. But like, as soon as I was 18, I was getting store cards thrown at me. Do you want to open a store card? You'll get a discount. And then I had debt growing up, and that made me feel shame. But it's so common, but it's just that I don't know whether it's a female thing more than a male thing, whether men will talk to each other about money more, I'm not sure. But women definitely need to get more confident in like talking about their finances and talking about, not necessarily like comparing income, but just like
just being open about it.
Yeah.
I think shame really tends to breed, doesn't it, when we feel that we're alone with our experience. And like that's when it really kind of starts to expand. Whereas I guess if we can be open about it and realize we're not alone, other people have these experiences too. Like definitely the shame starts to dissolve. But one thing I'd love to know is how, if you've seen any kind of changes at the moment in terms of the level of social connection we've got based on the cost of living crisis we're in, because I think a lot of us feel that if we don't have money or we don't have big budgets to spend on going out for drinks, dinners, having parties, it almost feels like kind of socializing and having fun needs to kind of go to the back of, you know, the priority list, especially when now people are genuinely just thinking, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to get through the winter? Have you seen less connection in harder times because people are more strapped for cash, or do you think actually when there's less money people come together more?
It's a combination of things, isn't it? Yeah, because the shame, I guess, over having financial struggles keeps people into themselves anyway. But then also there has been a survey where I saw a stat that was really shocking. I've forgotten the exact figure, but it was like the majority of people said this year that the impact of the cost of living crisis was going to significantly affect their social life this winter. And it's just so sad because that's when people really need people around them more, you know, and it shouldn't be something that only people who are privileged enough to have a healthy income get to do and like interact with other human beings. And that's why I gave free tickets away to my event as well, because I was like, I just want as many people as possible to be able to come to a safe space and connect with other people. It's so important.
I think that's amazing, because I think genuinely there will be so many people who, I don't know, might be invited to a get together with friends, or it might be someone's birthdays and they so want to go or attend, but like they do not have, or do not, you know, really can't afford to spend the money. And so instead of just saying, guys, I want to be with you, could we like do something a bit more low key or whatever, they'll sooner make an excuse because it would be too shameful to kind of ask anyone to tone it down a bit. I think this is a very grey area that we could probably talk about for a long time, but I think the more we can encourage people to come together without feeling the pressure to spend money, the better.
It's like that classic thing, isn't it? Like I used to be obsessed with Refinery 29.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ellie loves it.
Something similar on your page. It was really good.
Yes.
Ellie has,
Bare money.
Yeah, it's brilliant because you just get that insight that you wouldn't normally get, and that's why I think that column was so popular. And it's a classic thing when you have a friendship group. Some people learn more than others. Some people can't always go out because they can't afford it. So it's like being compassionate of other people, like that's the key as well, isn't it? Like even if you're not the one struggling yourself, like thinking of other people. If you want to get everyone together, think of how you can do that in an affordable way.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with someone about this the other day, and they were saying that what it should be, and they were like, I don't know how you quite frame it, which I agree with, but it's that the person that has, I guess, the most financial stress or like the least income should be the one is the group that decides what you do. But obviously that's hard because no one wants to be like, I'm the one that earns the least. But if you can somehow kind of get to a place where people are comfortable being like, okay, this is my budget, at least then you can try and arrange plans that people can all feel like they can afford.
Yeah. I really love that as a concept, and I think that would just work so much better. But also, I have heard people on the other side going, often it'll be I'm in a relationship with somebody and he or she can't afford to spend the same, and I'm getting, and then a resentment starts to build because they want to go and do these great things, and I think it's just a very tough one, as we know. Hence why we have Money Unfiltered.
Yeah, it's so important. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for ages, like the impact of debt on mental health and sorry. So yeah, they're fantastic conversations to be having.
That's actually such a good point that you raised there about that impact of debt and money worries on mental health, because there are so many studies that link the two, and it really is this vicious cycle that you can find yourself in. And again, I think that where it loops back to this connection point again is that so often the hardest thing to do and the most important thing to do if you're struggling with debt or mental health or both, is to reach out to someone and to ask for help. But I just wondered if there is anyone that's listening to this and that is not sure where to start, and they're maybe not local, so they can't come to one of your events. Are there any other resources or places that you'd encourage people to go to look for connections or to start meeting people?
Yeah, I think, you know what, this is a question I ask at my events, and I've got some good tips from some of my speakers now. Volunteering always seems to be one that people are really passionate about, because you're coming together with people who care about the same things. Shared values is really important in a friendship, isn't it? So that's a good place to start. I think finding places on Meetup's great. Looking for, sometimes it's a niche hobby that you might want to get started with, and perhaps you might have friends already but they're not interested in that hobby, and you want to connect with people through a certain thing. So it might even be like, social media can be used for good in that way. Like, you can search hashtags and look at what's going on in your city that way, and then I've met people online who I've then met in real life and had real friendships with. So it's not all bad with social media.
Yeah, well, that's a question I wanted to ask, because I think social media is often just pointed at as the kind of cause of so much of our mental health issues in society today, which we know are just getting worse and worse. But I was going to ask, do you think it can be used for good? And do you have any tips for kind of using social media in a healthy way to promote genuine connection, rather than kind of falling into the traps that we all do that lead to unhealthy outcomes?
Yeah, I think, like I say, using the hashtags to find like specific areas that you're interested in, and then you can curate your feed according to the things that perhaps light you up. I mean, I could say the obvious things and like, don't get caught in doom scrolling, but it's such an easy trap to fall into. That's why the apps were designed. They have the best psychologists in the world working on these apps. So it's no one's fault.
If only they were instead working on our mental health.
It's like old thing, isn't it? Comparison's a thief of joy. And I think if you can remember that it's not real what we see on social media, and think if we're using it in a way that, some people are using it to create, and I think that's a good way of getting out of the spiral of just scrolling, but not everyone's a creator. Some people might just be using it to keep in touch with friends or get inspired. Sometimes we do want that inspirational content that's like aspirational, and we don't mind if we can't afford it. We just like to look at nice things and houses that we'll probably never live in. But yeah, I think just being mindful of how it makes you feel in your body while you're on social media, and unfollowing people who aren't making you feel very good. And time limits are always really good. Like, I have a 60-minute time limit on social media each day. Sometimes I ignore it if I want to carry on.
I need to do that, yeah.
I am the worst for ignoring my time limits, but they're a good reminder, aren't they, of like, maybe it's time to step away from the scrolling and have a break from it at least.
One question I'd really love to ask you, which is kind of a separate note, but it's a big question. I don't have the answer. I don't expect you to have the answer, but I just think it's something really interesting to talk about, and I'd love to get your view. One thing I've come to think, because I've also been, really navigating my own mental health and that of people around me who I care about, as, so many of us have. And one thing I've thought is, particularly because of social media, but just the kind of society we're in anyway, there seems to be this almost expectation that we should be happy all the time. And it's like, if you're not happy, that something's wrong. And one thing I've sort of come to think is that actually causes us to think something's wrong with us if we have an off day, or we feel low, or we feel sad, or we feel anxious. And I wonder if you think that kind of accepting that we are going to have good times and bad times, and accepting that anxiety is just a part of life for a lot of people, like, is there some value in just accepting and normalizing and becoming comfortable with that, rather than expecting ourselves to be super happy and feeling so great all the time?
That's exactly what it is, just accepting all the feelings, and it's really hard. I read Ruby Wax's book this year.
I haven't read it, but I've heard it's amazing.
Yeah, so good. And she says that, like, the first start is like the emotion that you like label as negative, which is bad to start with. No positive or negative emotions. It just it's all part of life, and we have to accept it all. It's not realistic otherwise. But then if you then beat yourself up for having that emotion, that's the second arrow, which makes it even worse. But if you can just be present and acknowledge what you are feeling and sort of ride it through. And she talks about like honing in on the specific sensations in your body as well. But I don't think happiness is what most people think it is. Like,
Yes.
I think I remember listening to a podcast, Fern Cotton, and she was talking to
Her podcast is great.
someone. It was a guy, I think he actually passed away. I think he was dying when she did the podcast. It was really profound. But he was saying that she was talking about when her cat died, and she talked about like going on a walk, and she felt really connected to the world, even though she was so upset. She'd had this cat for nearly 20 years. And he said, you know what, you were happy, even though you were grieving. That is happiness, like that feeling of connection.
I can completely relate to that, yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? You just think it's all like, oh, life's great, and like...
And I think it gives us perspective as well. I mean, nobody wants to feel sort of pain and suffering on a day-to-day basis. No. But without that, I'm not sure that we'd appreciate, you know, the good and the positive. And life is, you know, that is life, isn't it? Yeah. I don't believe, kind of like we said before, and, you know, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't believe that anyone gets away kind of unscathed, like when it comes to kind of mental health and the roller coaster of emotions that we all go through.
Definitely not. And, you know, I also want to acknowledge that I don't think I've had any real significant struggles that a lot of people will be going through. Sure. And I don't want to sit here and say, look, just accept it, because what do I know? And I'm not a professional, but there is something in that, definitely. I do know that from my own experience. So yeah, I think it has some weight.
Yeah, and I just think as well, like, that even those people that are really struggling, that are in the depths of dealing with mental health issues, like, there is always some help out there, even if it doesn't feel like it. And often it is about that first step to saying to someone, actually, I need some help. I listened to a podcast the other day, which was actually someone who ended up in a mental health hospital, but it really was only by saying, I think I need help, that they were able to then get that help, and people around them could come and rally. And so I think, you know, again, it doesn't have to be at that extreme of the spectrum. It can just be, if you're having a bad week or a bad day, you don't have to deal with it alone. And you have got people around you, whether they're friends, whether it's a charity, whether it's a helpline. There are always going to be people that are willing and able to listen and to support.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Like, people don't want to burden other people, and also like what I've just said, I probably shouldn't say that, because we gaslight ourselves, don't we? And we go, oh well, other people have got it worse.
It's so hard, isn't it? Yeah.
If you think you need help, then you need help, and there's always someone there who will help you. So it's all about that comparison on the other side of it as well.
You don't want to minimize any or trivialize or minimize anyone else's suffering, but you also don't want to do it to your. You also want to acknowledge your own as well. And I guess everybody's journey is their own. But one thing I'd love to know is kind of about some of the really positive experiences you've seen from bringing people together through Same Shit, Different Brain.
Oh, yeah. At my last event, I had a speaker, Alina, and she's in the Homes for Ukraine scheme in Manchester, with a host family in Radcliffe. And she really generously agreed to be a speaker and talk on stage about the communities that she's found in Manchester. And it was so nice how heartwarming it was, like how positive and happy she was to be here, because I didn't know what she was going to say about it. I thought it must be, so lonely coming from your country, being forced out of your home. But it was just great. And then after it turns out a guy that I know who had brought along his friend, she was also in that scheme, and they made friends and had arranged to meet up like another.
That is amazing.
Oh, that's all I wanted.
Yeah. Well done. That's amazing. That is so incredible that you made that happen.
Also, as well, like my family came along, and it was really nice just to see like my brother chatting to people who were there, like people who come on their own, and like anyone who just came by themselves and put themselves out there. It's just really nice to see, because they're like putting their faith in you to help them in some way, or hopefully like watch something that will inspire them and help them to find those communities.
What is in store for Same Shit, Different Brain in 2023? What is the vision that you have for it?
I think more events. I feel like I've just got started with events. I would love to, I keep thinking about perhaps doing like, so I can open it up to a wider audience, more sort of like webinars or like workshop type online events, and yeah, maybe take it like down to London as well.
Yeah.
Yes, we want to have you in London.
Yes,
I mean, I still think I live in London. Yeah,
Leeds.
yeah, I'm actually in Leeds. Bring it to Leeds as well. Bring it to Leeds.
Go
Bring
on
it to
tour.
Yorkshire.
Yeah.
Do a tour around the UK.
Yeah, I think as well with like the topics that I want to focus on, I really want to hone in on some more like specific ones and get really in on like some more feminist topics maybe, and some that are going to like really get people fired up, as well as like the ones that will speak to a wide audience.
Yeah, amazing. And what response have you had from your community in terms of like what they're asking for? Are they asking for more events, or are they is there anything specific that they're asking for to connect?
Yeah, I think the events seem to really resonate with people, and I notice when there are like specific topics that I talk about, maybe doing like Instagram lives or getting an expert in on a podcast, like things like gut health. You know, there's all these like buzz topics now that people are really interested in, and people really want to hear people like having those discussions around it. So that's always really interesting to get super specific on a topic.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's loads that is going to be happening then in the next year by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I think there's just so much you can do. I'm so excited to watch it grow. One other thing I'd just love to ask, I know we're running out of time, but I'd just love to ask, what's your I'd be really interested to know, like, what's the kind of demographic? Who are you finding that's most engaged when it comes to saying, yeah, I want to connect, I want to connect with people?
It seems like sort of 25 to late 30s are like the biggest sort of bracket in women, but then men as well. Quite a big following of men. I've had quite a few male guests, and it makes me realise like I need to think about the topics that I'm passionate about, because if you're talking about something that really matters to you, that's when you're going to really connect with people, aren't you? Because I think I have had stages where I'm like, oh, but this person might not resonate with that, or this might not speak to that person, you know, just trying to cover too many bases. And you can't always speak to everyone. You need to think about like really specific like challenges that people have got and be able to answer that in a real actionable way, I guess.
And you never know, down the line you could always have a whole ambassador of Same Shit, Different Brain like army that can cover all of the different topics and speak to all the different people.
Yeah, I'd love to do stuff with children as well, actually, you know, like, because there's so much that's needed in terms of education in school.
Massively.
Well-being and everything.
I've really seen it with my nieces, like for everyone. I think for most people, being a teenager comes with its whole own set of anxiety and worries and issues, but I look at them and I think, wow, the world they're in now, having to navigate this, it's a lot.
Kettle of fish. Like, I didn't even have Facebook when I was at school. I think it started when I was in college, and I just hats off to them. You know, they get a lot of stick of like being a generation that like snowflakes or whatever, but they handle so much more than we had to. We just had to think about going, seeing our friends, no mobile phones, no social media.
That is the one that always gets me, like the idea of going on a night out and like people live recording it and like putting it on the internet. Like, I understand why people don't drink anymore. Like we had at least, you know, until the next morning to clear up all the photos before they went onto the internet. I cannot imagine how stressful it must be. But yeah, I think that's definitely like a demographic I can see you really kind of connecting with and talking to. And hopefully we can start to address that kind of loneliness epidemic before it becomes any bigger and kind of engulfs even more young people, really.
Yeah, because it's like things like emotional intelligence get considered as soft skills, but think how far that gets you in the world compared to like algebra.
I'd take emotional intelligence over an IQ. Yeah, I'd take EQ over IQ any day.
Yeah, figuring out like what makes you happy or what makes you do good for the world, rather than focusing on like what grade you get or how much you're going to be able to earn or what specific job you're going to get, which is not going to stay the same forever anyway. And
I think what's hard as well for that generation of kids now is that their parents are of the, you know, an older generation obviously, and they're looking and still in the mindset of it's amazing to kind of go to university and get a really well-paid, prestigious job. So you've kind of got a real disconnect there. And I imagine it's, well, I know from my own family, but I think it's really hard for parents who are, say, now in their kind of 40s to be able to relate to their kind of teenage kids because they live in such different worlds.
Yeah, I know. I do wonder if they will rebel against it because now you have like all the parents are on Facebook. Well, all the grandparents are on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Yeah. Yeah, my grandparents are on it for sure.
Yeah.
And you think they would be the lonely, you would expect that they would be the key demographic. You'd expect the older people to be the loneliest in society. But what I've seen, I think they still keep their kind of rituals and all their meetups. They actually still place such an importance in their day-to-day lives on having those connections, whereas we've lost it a lot more.
I saw a stat on that recently. It's not the oldest demographic that are the loneliest. It's around 18 to early 20s. That's just so sad.
Isn't it?
It's supposed to be
It should be like the best time of your life. Yeah.
But there is hope. I am optimistic that with conversations like those that you're having, with getting out of pandemic life and people getting back to in-person, real-life connection, friendships, then I do have hope that we will start to see that shift a little bit.
Definitely.
But for anyone that is interested in what you're up to with Same Shit, Different Brain, anyone that wants to find out more about your event, where can they find you?
So Instagram, straightforward at Same Shit Different Brain, or my website is sameshitdifferentbrain.com. Twitter, same S diff brain, bit easier, bit shorter. Or Facebook as well, Same Shit Different Brain.
We will put all of the links in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming and joining us.
Thank you.
It's been so great to hear about all of your experiences and what you're doing for Connection.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me. It's been really nice to chat.
Honestly, that was amazing.